up? What up? What up? Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's up, everybody? Good to see you again. I want to be on here every day if I can. I won't be on here every day, but that's my goal. So good to see you again. Today we are going to be talking about Jesus' lineage. I wrote so chapter 1 in the book is called Lineage, and it goes over Matthew chapter 1 verses 1 through 17, and Jesus' other genealogy found in Luke chapter 3. And I'll just read to you an excerpt from the chapter to get us started here. The room was peaceful and quiet. Sorry, let me start over. The room was peaceful, with only the soft crackle of oil lamps breaking the quiet. A small group of young believers had gathered after dinner, moving their stools closer as two elders started to talk. Matthew's beard was now white, while Luke's hands, steady and precise, rested on his knees. It wasn't long before someone asked the question that puzzled many. Brothers, why do your genealogies of Jesus differ so much? Matthew and Luke shared a knowing glance. They had answered this many times before, but tonight they didn't feel annoyed. Instead, they appeared grateful, as if as if they welcomed an opportunity to discuss the Lord once again. So this is from my book Jesus. Um, if you haven't grabbed this book, you should. A lot of people are enjoying this book and telling their friends about it, and I want you to be one of them. Go to stapletonbooks.com to pick you up a copy. It's available as a book and an ebook as well. And then the audiobook I'm hoping will be out sometime next week. But so this is the chapter that got a lot of people talking, a lot of people excited, and honestly, it was a little challenging to write. Conceptually, I'm like, how in the world am I supposed to, like, I'm telling a story. I'm not writing a commentary, though, sometimes it feels like a commentary. I do like to explain what's happening in the story. Um, but overall, the book should feel like an unraveling story, just one continuous story. And so I'm like, how am I supposed to talk about the genealogies in a way that doesn't feel stiff? And I got the idea, what if I set the scene years after the death, burial, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus, where we have the church, and and we have apostles, and the apostles are teaching the second generation of believers. What if I did something like that? And so that got me thinking, okay, well, maybe we could do it like a podcast where Matthew and Luke are sitting across from each other, and they're explaining their craft. They're explaining why they wrote the way they did. And so I thought, that would be pretty cool. That would be pretty accessible. And so that's the direction I went. And a lot of you love that. A lot of you love that. So thank you. Thank you for that. It's an opportunity in the sequel to kind of maybe revisit that conversation. So stay tuned. But today, what I want to do is not talk so much about my chapter, because the chapter is a commentary on what really matters the most, which is the gospel record, which is the Bible, which is the words that God had inspired to be written, the stories that God had inspired to be written. I want to talk about that. So first, let's talk about Matthew's genealogy. You can pick that up in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, and he begins with a simple line: the book or the record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So what that tells us is that, um, is that Jesus' line is traced from Abraham to David. And then as we look at the genealogy, we can tell a few more things. We can tell, okay, he's going to go from David to Solomon, and then down from Joseph, and then he ends with Jesus. And so Matthew moves forward in time. Again, here are the major points of the genealogy. You have Abraham, he begins the genealogy. You have David, you have the exile, and then you have Jesus. And so when you compare that with Luke's genealogy, you can find that in Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38. Luke begins with this line. It's after Jesus is baptized, and he says, Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. So when you look into Luke's account of what happened, Luke traces the line from Jesus back to David and then all the way back to Adam. And then he ends with God because God is Adam's father directly, right? So Luke moves backward in time, Matthew moves forward. Now, here's some major similarities between the two. They both affirm that Jesus was a real historical person, guys. He's a real historical person. Josephus wrote about him. There are there's so many different historians that wrote about Jesus. He is a historical figure. I mean, even Islam, they acknowledge him as a prophet. So Jesus appears in a few different writings other than the Bible, and then but they connect him to David. Okay, so now Jesus doesn't belong to the three major world religions. He belongs to the storyline of the Bible, and so he's connected with David. And so now we're in the Jewish story, right? The Hebrew story, and then he presents the Messiah. So so he presents him as the Messiah. Messiah means anointed one. It means chosen one. It means the one that is picked, the one that is picked by anointing, by pouring on with oil. The first time we see someone anointed in the Bible, I believe, is when Samuel is anointing King Saul as king, and he does it by pouring the oil on his head. And I think this happens again when David is picked as king. He is anointed. In a dry, arid culture, in a dry, arid climate, oil was very important. For those of you that are like me and you got some dry skin, lotion is important. Oil is important. That shea butter is important. So the same idea here. They are anointed and they are chosen. The idea is synonymous. I'm reminded of the psalm. It's one of my favorite lines from the Psalms. David says, I believe it's David. He says, "You have anointed me with the oil of gladness." I just love that. I love that. If you're feeling dry, if you're feeling weary, if you're feeling just kind of broken, you need some of that oil. You need some of that oil. Spiritually, I'm talking about. Okay. Back to the genealogy. They both include Joseph as Jesus' legal father. So in Luke, it says that he was supposed to be the son of Joseph. And so you got to understand, Jesus had a rough upbringing, and I relate to him so much because, I had a rough upbringing. Like, imagine this. Tradition tells us that Joseph died perhaps when Jesus was a child, sometime when he was growing up, which is why we can speculate at the cross when Jesus is dying, his mother's there, but his father isn't, and he probably would have been there, but he died most likely. I don't write that in the book. I think I don't write that in the book. I may have it may have been a throwaway line somewhere. But I don't really speculate too much in that. But I believe that he died, and it's really interesting what we do see, and I do include this in the book. In John chapter 8, the people are asking Jesus about his credentials, and they're like, "Hey, at least we know who our father is." And Jesus is like, "Your father's the devil." All throughout Jesus' life, they thought he was a bastard. Oh yeah, well, at least we know who our mom is. Your mom slept with so many men, she doesn't even know who your dad is. Like, that's the kind of hate that Jesus got. And Jesus says, "Your father's the devil. You act just like him. You lie just like him. Uh, you don't love the Father. You don't. If you love the Father, you love me." But you keep saying your father's Abraham. But if your father was Abraham, you would do the things that Abraham did, right? We're gonna get into that later, the confrontation. But all throughout Jesus' life, this followed him. Oh yeah, you're not legitimate. That's the idea. That's the idea. And so um, the genealogies, they also tie Jesus into Israel's covenantal history. This is why the genealogy itself, the list itself, is important. This is why Abraham is important and David is important, because God made promises to these men. God said to Abraham, I will make you a father of a great nation, and through your nation I will bless the families of the earth, in Genesis 12:3. He says to David, or he says to Moses, there will be a prophet like me that will come after you. Moses is not in the genealogy, but again, he appears later on in the story, and he is an archetype of Jesus. Um, Again, he makes promises to David, right? That there will be an heir that will sit on his throne, and it's not Solomon. I mean, it is Solomon, but in a greater sense, it's someone else. Jesus, to quote Jesus, someone greater than Solomon is here. And Jesus, in the life of Jesus, we see the fulfillment of Old Testament expectations. There's so many predictions, so many prophecies, so many things predicted about him that are actualized in the life of Jesus. And so both genealogies here are concerned with the Davidic covenant. The Messiah is the son of David. Again, just to bring this up, 2 Samuel 7:16 says, your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. This is God's way of telling David, someone will sit on your throne, which is, again, a little disorienting when we think about the actual story of the Bible. Like, after David, what happens? A bunch of scoundrels succeed the throne and then exile. And so it doesn't seem like this throne endures forever. God is speaking of a different throne. Now, we've talked about the similarities. Here are the differences between the accounts. The first is the starting points. Matthew starts with Abraham, and Luke starts with Adam. They're working opposite each other, right? Matthew is going down the line of time. I should go this way, down the line of time, and Luke is working backwards. Luke, oh, should I say Matthew, his concern is to show that Jesus is the fulfillment to Israel's history, that he is their Jewish Messiah. He is the one that fulfills the promises to David. So Matthew opens the mirroring of Genesis, right? The book of the genealogy, if you read Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. Now Luke, what he's doing is he's writing to Gentiles. He's writing to Gentiles. I say in the book, there's this line that says Gentiles are are accepting faith everywhere throughout the empire. And I wanted to showcase that Jesus was not just for the Jews, but he was for humanity, right? So Luke connects Jesus not only to Israel, but to all of humanity itself. Luke wants to show that Jesus is that Jesus belongs to all humanity, that he's the savior of the world, and that he's the second Adam. And Luke fits into broader themes of like salvation for Gentiles, attention and care for the poor and the outsiders, and for all nations, right? Remember, when Jesus is throwing over tables, he says, my house will be a house of prayer for not just Israel, all nations. And Luke shows that in his genealogy. They differ. Now there are different lines through David, and this is the biggest issue. For Matthew, he traces the royal line David to Solomon. For Luke, he traces it David to Nathan. Both were sons of David, but different branches of the family. So after David, the genealogies diverge almost entirely. And why is this important? It's important because, there are several explanations. The first is that, one's a legal line and one's a biological line. All right, Matthew gives Joseph's legal, royal line, the line of kings, and Jesus right to the throne of David. What Luke will give us is Jesus' biological ancestry. That's the difference. And possibly through Mary's line. So under this view, Joseph was Jesus' legal father. Mary supplied the Jesus' blood descent from David. This explains why Luke says that he was the supposed son of Joseph. And this is actually cool too, because sin theologically is traced through the males in the Bible, the male bloodline. But if Jesus has no earthly father, no bloodline, no male blood, um, he's not born with it, so to speak. It's kind of an interesting theory. Um, another argument would be the Levirate marriage theory. So, under Jewish law, and you can look at Deuteronomy chapter 25 for this, if a man dies childless, his brother could marry a widow and raise up offspring in his name. In fact, it's really interesting. There's this stupid occasion that happens at the end of Jesus' life. Jesus is just kind of throwing down, just throwing down the gauntlet, just being like, "Hey, this is what it is. This is who I am. This is what it's like." And they come up to him and they're like, "Hey, we have a question for you. We know you believe in the resurrection. Say there was a woman and she was married to 7 dudes, but she was bad luck. I don't know, for one reason or another, they all died. Who's she going to be married to in the resurrection?" And Jesus, he says, "You're mistaken, because you neither know the scriptures nor the power of God. In the resurrection, they're not going to marry. They're not going to have sex. They're going to be like angels." Right? And what they were doing is they were taking this scenario from the law of Moses, where Levirate marriage. If your brother dies, your brother, you as the brother, you're supposed to step in and help him out and raise children in his name. Um, so this could produce one legal father and one biological father. Some early church writers suggested that this explains the difference in the names. Is this possible? Yes. Is it probable? Not too much. Now, the third view is that Matthew is royal and theological. So many modern scholars emphasize Matthew's literary structure. For Matthew, he intentionally organizes history into 3 groups of 14. So we have the generations from Abraham to David, and then David to the exile, and then the exile to Christ. It's really interesting. I think this is why the Chosen kind of typecasted Matthew as a little bit autistic, a little bit OCD, a little bit, kind of attention to details, because that's some attention to details. It's kind of cool. So this is acceptable in ancient genealogies, because genealogies often emphasize theological meaning rather than exhaustive modern precision. We want the facts, we want the timestamps, we want the precision, and sometimes, many times, in fact, this is pretty much kind of a rule, I guess, in antiquity documents. We don't get all of those details like that. They had different purposes when they were writing. So rather than asking our questions, which we can, we first need to ask the questions. Well, what questions were they asking, or what questions were they attempting to answer when they wrote thus and so, thus and so? And um, so yeah. Also, what's unique about Matthew are the women. Matthew includes the women, and these women are not like the cleaned up kind of, acceptable societal. Like these are well, just Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, the wife of Uriah, Mary. Like these are scandals. Like Tamar, um, like that's just a nasty story. Rahab, um, prostitute. Ruth, um, single and kind of desperate. I might be reading too much into that story. And then the wife of Uriah. I mean, you know that David was on top of his roof. He saw a beautiful woman butt naked, and he decided, I need that. And I don't care if she's married. I'll just kill her husband, and it's gonna be fine. Right? This is the lore of Jesus' family, and it's included in the genealogy. Um, and you might ask why. Some of you, when you read the Bible, you're like, "This is such a clean book." It's not a book I'd read to my son Eli. It is a gross, grimy book. I mean, we have to be very selective about the stories that we read from it, because a lot of them are R and X rated. But these women, they were associated with scandal, with Gentile identity, with irregular circumstances, and with surprising grace. This is why they're included, because God redeems their story. So Matthew prepares his readers for the virgin birth, the grace of sinners, and Gentile inclusion, which is big. It's so important for the Jewish audience. Matthew emphasizes kingship, right? Jesus is the son of David. He's the rightful king. He's the fulfillments of prophecy. And the reason why the genealogy appears first in his gospel is because kings They showed their credentials by showing their genealogy. Oh, who do you come from? Oh, I come from this king and this king and this king. Jesus is also a king, and he's not ashamed to include all of it, all the scandals, all of the brokenness, all of the what would that, like it's all in there. Now, um, Luke emphasizes that Jesus is um, he's for humanity, right? So after Jesus is baptized, the voice of God comes down to the river and says, "Hey, you are my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased." And this traces back to Adam, because Adam is also, he was technically the first son of God. Jesus is the second Adam. This is where Paul is going to get his language in Romans about the first Adam and the second Adam, Romans 5. So that's really what we need to know about the genealogies. And and let me just say this: the genealogies are important. I'm going to wrap this up. The genealogies are important because they show us that Jesus did not appear out of nowhere. All right? Jesus did not appear out of nowhere. He was historical. He emerged from Abraham's covenant, David's kingdom, Israel's exile, and humanity's brokenness. And you know what? I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful for a God that doesn't that's not distant, that doesn't know what it's like to be us, that doesn't know what it's like to deal with shame and embarrassment and a broken family and less than ideal circumstances. I mean, that's what some of you come from. That's what many of you come from. And our Bible paints a picture of God who can relate to us. God made flesh. God in the flesh. God assuming humanity, as I say in my book. So that's what I'm gonna leave you with. That's the genealogy. Hey, again, if you haven't got a chance to pick up this book, stapletonbooks.com is live, and you want to pick up a copy from there. Buy one for yourself, buy one for a friend, and I will see you in the next one. God bless.